I stood paralyzed in the pitch-black living room, the only light coming from the Ouija board that seemed to glow with a life of its own. Whispers swirled around me, intangible yet suffocating, like cold fingers brushing against my neck. My eyes locked onto the planchette as it slid across the board on its own accord, spelling out, GETOUT. My heart slammed against my ribcage. We had crossed a line we shouldn't have. But let me back up a bit. My name's Alex Thompson, a sophomore at Greenwood University, majoring in English literature, not that it matters much right now. About a month ago, my buddies and I decided to move off campus. There was Jake, the adrenaline junkie who never met a dare he didn't like, Lisa, a psychology major with a penchant for debunking supernatural myths, and Tom, my roommate since freshman year, a laid-back guy more interested in his guitar than ghost stories. We found this old Victorian house just a few blocks from campus. Rent was dirt cheap, probably because the place was ancient and a bit rundown. But hey, it had character, or so we thought. Think about it, guys, Jake had said, his eyes gleaming. A place like this has history. Maybe even a ghost or two. Lisa rolled her eyes. Ghosts aren't real, Jake. But it could be a fascinating case study for my psych classes. Tom and I exchanged glances. We were in it to save money and maybe have a decent place to throw parties. The first few days were uneventful, just the usual unpacking and arguing over who got which bedroom. Then Jake found the Ouija board in the attic. Guys, check this out, he exclaimed, sliding down the rickety ladder with the dusty board in his hands. It looked old, with strange symbols carved along the edges. I shrugged, probably left behind by the previous tenants. Lisa smirked. Or maybe it's a portal to the spirit world, she said sarcastically. Jake's eyes lit up, only one way to find out. That night, we gathered around the coffee table, candles flickering to set the mood, Jake's idea, of course. Is anyone there? He asked, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. I was skeptical until the planchette moved under our fingertips, sliding over to, yes. Very funny, guys, I said, looking around. But everyone seemed just as surprised as I was. Lisa leaned forward, intrigued. What's your name? She asked. The planchette spelled out, Elias. We went back and forth for a while, asking questions and getting cryptic answers. Jake was thrilled. Lisa was analytical. Tom looked uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After that night, strange things started happening. Doors creaked open on their own. Footsteps echoed in empty hallways. Lisa's cat, Muffin, hissed at corners where nothing was there. I brushed it off as the quirks of an old house, but the atmosphere felt heavier, like the air before a thunderstorm. One night, I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. I'd had a nightmare about a dark figure standing at the foot of my bed, just staring. The next morning, I found out that Jake, Lisa, and Tom had the exact same dream. This is getting weird, Tom said, strumming absent-mindedly on his guitar. Lisa tried to rationalize it. It's probably a subconscious reaction to the Ouija board session. Shared psychological experience. Jake wasn't convinced. Or maybe Elias is trying to tell us something. Things escalated when the Ouija board started showing up in random places. I found it on the kitchen counter one morning, even though we had stored it back in the attic. Lisa discovered it on her desk, open and waiting. Tom tried to hide it in the basement, but it always seemed to find its way back. The whispers began shortly after. Faint at first, like a distant conversation just out of earshot. Then clearer, more insistent. I could hear my name being called when no one was around. Shadows moved in my peripheral vision. The house was alive, and it wasn't friendly. Which brings me back to that night in the living room. I had woken up thirsty and headed downstairs for a glass of water. The moment I stepped into the living room, the air turned icy. The candles on the mantel ignited simultaneously, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The Ouija board lay on the coffee table, glowing unnaturally. Who's there? I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. That's when the whispers enveloped me, unintelligible but filled with malice. The planchette moved. GETOUT. I didn't need to be told twice. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair, and sprinted upstairs. I banged on Jake's door. We need to leave. Now. We gathered in the kitchen, all of us shaken. Lisa suggested we do some research on the house. Maybe there was a logical explanation. After digging through old newspaper archives and town records, we found out that a man named Elias Grayson had lived there in the early 1900s. He was rumored to be involved in occult practices and had vanished under mysterious circumstances. "This is insane," Tom muttered. "We're living in a cliché horror story." "Maybe we can communicate with him," Jake said eagerly. Lisa shook her head. "No, we need to stop this. We should try to get rid of the Ouija board." We decided to destroy it. Took it to the backyard, poured lighter fluid over it, and tossed in a match. The flames roared to life, but as they consumed the board, a piercing scream echoed around us. The fire blew out abruptly, leaving the board charred but intact. "What the hell?" I whispered, my hands shaking. Desperate, we reached out to a local paranormal investigator named Mr. Hawkins. He arrived the next day, an older man with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. After inspecting the house, he sat us down. "I don't think your house is haunted," he began, "but I do believe you're experiencing something very real." He explained that the old wiring in the house could emit electromagnetic fields, which can cause feelings of paranoia and hallucinations. The strange sounds and moving objects could be attributed to the house settling and drafts. "And the Ouija board?" Jake asked. Mr. Hawkins smiled. "A powerful tool, yes, but only if you believe it is. Fear can make us see things that aren't there." We took his advice and had the house rewired. The strange occurrences stopped, the air felt lighter, and for the first time in weeks, we all slept soundly. But even as life returned to normal, I couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered. One afternoon, I was cleaning out the attic when I found an old journal tucked away in a corner. It belonged to Elias Grayson. Curiosity got the better of me, and I flipped through the pages filled with cryptic symbols and unsettling drawings. One entry caught my eye. "They think I'm gone, but this house is mine. I will not be driven out." A chill ran down my spine. Maybe Mr. Hawkins was right. Maybe it was all in our heads. But deep down, I knew Elias was still there, watching, waiting. I decided not to tell the others. We were all finally at peace, and I didn't want to stir things up again. I took the journal and hid it where no one would find it. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear faint whispers. I tell myself it's the wind or my imagination. But part of me wonders if we merely silenced Elias, not banished him. Life moved on. Jake graduated and took a job overseas. Lisa published a paper on group psychology under stress. Tom transferred to another school. I stayed in that house until I finished my degree. On my last night, I sat in the living room, the shadows dancing around me. "I'm leaving now," I said aloud. "The house is yours." As I closed the door behind me, I thought I heard a whisper. "Goodbye." Was it real? Was any of it real? I don't know, but I do know this. Some things are better left undisturbed. Story 2. The shop's lights flickered wildly as the air grew colder. The Ouija board lay open on the counter, the planchette moving in circles on its own. I backed away slowly, heart pounding. "What do you want from me?" I shouted into the empty store. A whisper echoed back, "Join us." Let me start from the beginning. I'm Sarah, owner of a quaint antique shop called Timeless Treasures. Last month, I acquired a shipment from an old estate sale. Among the vintage jewelry and dusty books was an intricately designed Ouija board. It had strange symbols and was unlike any I'd seen before. Curious, I decided to display it prominently. Customers were intrigued but hesitant. One evening, as I was closing up, an elderly woman came in. She looked at the Ouija board and whispered, "You should be careful with that." Before I could ask her what she meant, she was gone. That night, I heard noises downstairs. Thinking it was a break-in, I grabbed a flashlight and went to investigate. The Ouija board was open, and the planchette was on the letter S. Chalked it up to a draft and secured it. But the disturbances escalated. Items moved on their own, shadows lurked just out of sight, and I started having vivid nightmares of people I didn't recognize. Determined to find answers, I researched the board's symbols and discovered it once belonged to a spiritualist in the 1800s who was accused of dark practices. The more I dug, the more I felt connected to it. One stormy night, the activity peaked. Which brings me back to the shop, lights flickering, and the board seemingly alive. In a moment of clarity, I grabbed the board and shouted, "Leave me alone." The shop went silent. The next day, everything was back to normal. Later, I found out my assistant, Mark, had been orchestrating the events to drive business through a haunted shop gimmick. He confessed and apologized, and while I was angry, I couldn't deny that sales had spiked. I sold the Ouija board to a collector and made peace with the strange chapter. Whether it was a prank or something more, I'll leave that for others to decide. Story 3. Cold sweat dripped down my forehead as I navigated the labyrinth of the abandoned asylum. The walls seemed to close in, whispers growing louder with each step. The Ouija board I'd found earlier was now a burden in my backpack. Suddenly, a shadow darted across the hallway. I wasn't alone. But let me rewind. I'm Mike, an urban explorer and photographer. My friends and I love exploring deserted places, capturing their eerie beauty. Last weekend, we decided to check out Ridgeview Asylum, a place rumored to be haunted. We arrived just before dusk. The place was a hulking mass of decaying walls and shattered windows. While exploring, I stumbled upon an old Ouija board in a room that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. "Guys, look at this," I called out, but my friends were in another part of the building. Figuring it'd be a cool prop, I stuffed it into my backpack. As night fell, strange things began happening. We heard distant screams, doors slammed on their own, and our flashlights flickered erratically. My friend Lisa swore she saw someone watching us from a window. Feeling uneasy, we decided to head back. But the corridors seemed different, leading us in circles. Panic set in as we realized we were lost. Back to the present, with shadows moving unnaturally and the atmosphere thick with dread, I knew we had to stay calm. "Everyone, stick together," I said, trying to steady my voice. After what felt like hours, we found a window and managed to escape. Outside, the air was fresh, and the oppressive feeling lifted. Later, we learned that the asylum's structure was unstable, and our minds were playing tricks due to low oxygen levels in certain areas. The screams were wind passing through the cracked walls, and the layout was disorienting by design. The Ouija board? Just a creepy coincidence. We agreed to be more careful in future explorations, but that night remains etched in our memories.